For nearly 5 decades, Elvis Presley's casket has been the center of endless fascination. It's been photographed, rumored about, and even said to have been moved in secret. Some claim it never held his real body. Others insist it was reopened years later. But behind every wild theory lies a story rooted in truth, of grief, fear, and one of the most public funerals in American history. To understand why people still talk about that casket today, we need to go back to 1977, to the days when the world said goodbye to the king of rock and roll. Stay tuned to unpack the truth behind rumors. The death of Elvis Presley. It was the morning of August 16, 1977, and inside Graceland everything seemed calm. Elvis Presley had spent the night restlessly pacing, reading, and talking with his fiancée, Ginger Alden. He couldn't sleep. His health had been slipping for months. Exhaustion, weight gain, and a growing dependence on prescription medication had taken their toll. Sometime after 9 a.m., he told Ginger he was going to the bathroom. Those were the last words she ever heard him speak. A little while later, she found him on the floor, motionless. Panic filled the mansion. Staff members rushed to help as Ginger screamed for someone to call an ambulance. Within minutes, paramedics were speeding through the iron gates of Graceland. The dispatcher's voice over the radio was almost disbelieving. "Patient is Elvis Presley, unconscious and unresponsive." They performed CPR on the way to Baptist Memorial Hospital, but there was nothing anyone could do. At 3:30 p.m., doctors pronounced Elvis Presley dead. He was just 42 years old. Word spread instantly. News bulletins interrupted television programs across the country. Crowds gathered outside the hospital and then outside Graceland itself. Some cried openly, others simply stood in shock, unable to process that the most famous entertainer on earth was gone. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart attack. But even that didn't end the speculation. Elvis had been prescribed a long list of drugs, painkillers, sedatives, and sleeping pills. Later toxicology reports found traces of more than a dozen substances in his system. To many, it sounded like an accidental overdose. To others, it was proof that fame had finally destroyed the man behind the legend. Inside Graceland, Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was inconsolable. Friends said he barely spoke for hours. The home that had once echoed with laughter and music became eerily quiet. Meanwhile, outside the gates, grief began mixing with disbelief. Within hours, rumors started to spread. Some claimed to have seen Elvis leaving Memphis that morning. Others said the body had been switched, that the man in the hospital wasn't really him. In those early moments of chaos, the first sparks of conspiracy were born, whispers that Elvis might not be dead at all. Still, reality was impossible to ignore. The Presley family had to make decisions quickly. The world wanted a funeral, and fans wanted the chance to say goodbye. Vernon agreed to something that would make the day of Elvis's death even more unforgettable: a public viewing at Graceland. Overnight, workers transformed the mansion's foyer into a space of mourning. A custom-made copper casket was ordered from a Memphis funeral home, polished, heavy, and lined with white satin. It would be placed near the grand staircase, surrounded by flowers and guarded by family and security. By dawn, crowds stretched for blocks down Elvis Presley Boulevard. Some fans held candles, others carried guitars or handwritten letters. News crews from around the world set up cameras at the gates. The King's final curtain call had begun. For Vernon, it was both comforting and unbearable. He wanted the world to see his son one last time, but he also wanted to protect him from the chaos that had haunted his life. And so, the casket was opened. Fans filed through the mansion by the thousands, moving past the still figure dressed in a white suit and blue tie. To some, it was closure. To others, it only deepened the mystery. Many swore Elvis didn't look real, that his skin was too smooth, his hair too perfect. Within days, tabloids began printing wild claims that the body was a wax dummy. What should have been a final goodbye became the start of decades of speculation, questions that still echo whenever someone mentions Elvis Presley's casket. His funeral and open casket. The news of Elvis Presley's death spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, Memphis was overwhelmed. Reporters flew in from all over the world. Fans packed the streets, holding candles, flowers, and photographs. Some cried. Others just stood in silence, staring at the gates of Graceland as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Inside the mansion, the Presley family moved through shock and exhaustion. Vernon Presley was heartbroken but determined to do things the way his son would have wanted, with dignity, but also with the fans in mind. Elvis had always said his fans were like family. Now they were camped outside his home, begging for a chance to say goodbye. That's when Vernon made the decision that would make history. Elvis's coffin would be open to the public. Funeral workers arrived from the Memphis funeral home, bringing with them a custom-made copper casket. It was massive, polished to a golden shine and lined with soft white satin. The inside was lit gently to soften his appearance. His body had been carefully prepared, dressed in a white jumpsuit and blue tie with makeup applied to restore some of his natural color. His famous hair was perfectly styled, swept back the way millions remembered it from his stage days. The casket was placed in the foyer near the grand staircase, surrounded by flowers, hundreds of them. Bouquets came from around the world, filling the air with a thick, sweet scent of lilies and roses. In the center of it all, a single wreath was sent by Frank Sinatra, bearing a simple message: "Elvis, you will never be forgotten." When the doors finally opened, the line of mourners stretched for blocks down Elvis Presley Boulevard. Some estimates say as many as 30,000 people passed through Graceland over the next several hours. The crowd moved slowly, silently through the mansion, some clutching rosaries, others weeping openly. The heat was unbearable, but no one left. Those who made it inside described the scene as surreal. Soft gospel music played in the background and the lights were low. As people reached the casket, many broke down completely. Others whispered prayers. For many fans, that was the moment they realized the king was truly gone. But for others, it was the moment doubt began to grow. Some said the body didn't look right, that his face seemed too smooth, too waxy. A rumor started that the coffin was kept unusually cold to preserve the body. By the next morning, tabloids were printing wild speculation. Was it really Elvis in there? That rumor reached fever pitch when one of the most infamous photographs in celebrity history surfaced, a picture of Elvis lying in his casket. It appeared on the front page of the National Enquirer, selling millions of copies almost overnight. The photo was shocking not just because of what it showed, but because of how it was taken. Later investigations revealed that a cousin of Elvis, Billy Mann, had secretly snapped the picture with a hidden camera and sold it to the magazine for around $18,000. The Presley family was furious, but the damage was done. That single image was burned into the public imagination, and for conspiracy theorists, it was proof that something was off. People zoomed in on the details: the shape of the nose, the color of the skin, the tilt of the head. Some swore it looked like a wax figure. Others claimed Elvis's hands appeared smoother than they should have. The idea that the coffin contained a wax dummy rather than Elvis himself began circulating, and it would never completely disappear. Despite the controversy, the funeral went on as planned. On August 18, 2 days after his death, a private service was held inside Graceland for family, close friends, and a few fellow musicians. Reverend C.W. Bradley, who had baptized Elvis as a boy, delivered the eulogy. He spoke of Elvis's generosity, his faith, and his lifelong connection to gospel music. The sound of quiet sobbing filled the room. Priscilla Presley, visibly shaken, clutched her hands together. Lisa Marie, only 9 years old, sat beside her mother, staring ahead. Vernon sat in the front row, unable to hold back tears. After the private service, the family followed the casket outside, where it was placed on a white hearse. A massive procession began moving through Memphis, a slow parade of limousines, police escorts, and fans lining the streets. Some threw flowers as the hearse passed by, others knelt in prayer. It was said that every car radio in Memphis played an Elvis song that day. The hearse made its way to Forest Hill Cemetery, where Elvis's mother, Gladys, had been buried years earlier. The casket was lowered beside hers. For a moment, it seemed like peace had finally come to the Presley family. But it wouldn't last. Within weeks, reports surfaced of a plot to steal Elvis's body. It sounded too wild to be true, yet it was. The bizarre scheme would lead to police stakeouts, arrests, and ultimately the decision to move Elvis's remains forever. The attempt to rob his grave marked the first time since that funeral that Elvis's casket would be touched again. And it set the stage for one of the strangest chapters in American pop culture: the attempted theft and final burial. It happened only 2 weeks after the funeral, in the early hours of August 29, 1977. Forest Hill Cemetery, where Elvis and his mother Gladys were buried, was dark and still. The guards on duty noticed strange noises near the mausoleum, the sound of metal scraping against stone. When they went to check, they saw figures moving in the shadows, trying to pry open the crypt. The intruders fled before they could be caught, but police quickly uncovered what they had been attempting. A group of men, including a small-time criminal named Raymond Crazy Green, had planned to break into the Presley family tomb and remove Elvis's coffin. Their goal? To ransom his remains for money, or, as some said, to prove that Elvis wasn't really inside. The news hit Memphis like a bomb. Vernon Presley was terrified. The idea that someone would try to dig up his son was too much to bear. Security was immediately increased around the mausoleum, but Vernon made a painful decision. Elvis's body couldn't stay there. It wasn't safe. At first, the family considered moving him to a different cemetery with tighter security, but then Vernon had another idea. He wanted his son back home, where he could protect him himself inside the grounds of Graceland. He applied for special permission to move the remains, but at the time, local burial laws didn't allow private reinterment on residential property. Vernon appealed to the Memphis authorities, explaining the situation and the ongoing security risks. After hearing his plea and seeing the national media attention surrounding the attempted theft, officials granted an exception. And so, in the dead of night on October 2, 1977, just weeks after the failed heist, a small, heavily guarded convoy entered Graceland through a side gate. The Presley family wanted the move to be private. There were no cameras, no journalists, only a handful of funeral workers, security guards, and family members. The copper casket, which had drawn tens of thousands of mourners at the viewing, was carefully lifted from the crypt and placed into a hearse. Every move was done with precision and respect. Vernon Presley oversaw the operation personally, watching with tears in his eyes as his son was brought home for the last time. Inside Graceland, workers had prepared a quiet corner of the property known as the Meditation Garden, a space Elvis had loved for its tranquility. The spot overlooked a small fountain and a patch of trees. Beneath the moonlight, they lowered the casket into its new resting place beside a grave prepared for his mother, Gladys. The ceremony was brief and private, but deeply emotional. That night, Graceland became not just the Presley home, but also a sanctuary, a final resting place guarded day and night. Vernon made sure new security systems were installed immediately: cameras, alarms, and even an iron gate that locked the meditation garden from the public. The next morning, Elvis's fans learned that his remains had been moved. Reactions were mixed. Some were relieved he was finally safe, others suspicious that the move was an excuse to hide something. Conspiracy theorists claimed the body never made it to Graceland, arguing it was a cover story for an empty coffin. But for Vernon, the decision was simple. He wanted his boy home. In the months that followed, the garden became a sacred place. Vernon would often sit near the grave in silence, sometimes for hours. Friends said it brought him comfort to know Elvis was close. The family also placed a memorial plaque for his mother, and eventually for Vernon himself when he passed away in 1979. Years later, when Graceland opened to the public as a museum, fans from around the world began visiting the Meditation Garden. It remains the most emotional part of any tour, quiet, still, and surrounded by the sound of trickling water. Flowers are always placed at the foot of the graves, and every August, during the candlelight vigil, thousands of people walk through the garden carrying candles in complete silence. The failed attempt to steal Elvis's body turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It led to his reburial in the one place that truly felt like home. And since that night in October 1977, his casket has never been moved or opened again. But that hasn't stopped people from wondering what really lies inside it, a question that keeps the legend of Elvis alive even decades after his death. The conspiracy theory. For most people, the story should have ended there. Elvis Presley was gone, laid to rest in the garden he loved. But within weeks of his burial, whispers started spreading, whispers that refused to die. It began with a single photograph. In late August 1977, the National Enquirer published an image that shocked the world. It showed Elvis lying in his open casket, dressed in a white suit and light blue shirt. The photo had been taken secretly during the public viewing at Graceland, and the tabloid paid a reported $18,000 for it, a fortune at the time. The picture became one of the most viewed tabloid images in history, but rather than settling the matter, it made things worse. Fans who studied it closely said the man inside the coffin didn't look like Elvis. His face seemed waxy, his skin tone too light, his eyebrows arched differently. Some even claimed the nose looked wrong. Soon, theories began to spread that the body in the casket wasn't Elvis at all, that it was a wax replica, a decoy to fool the public while the real Elvis slipped away to start a new life in secret. It sounds wild. But remember 1977, Elvis wasn't just a celebrity. He was mythic. To millions, he wasn't supposed to die. People pointed to supposed proofs. First, there were the sightings. Within months, stories emerged from all over America. A man looking like Elvis was seen at an airport in Memphis, supposedly boarding a plane to Argentina. A woman in Kalamazoo claimed she saw him buying lunch at a Burger King. Another fan said she met a truck driver who sounded exactly like Elvis. The stories were endless, and so were the explanations. Some said Elvis faked his death to escape fame. Others believed he'd gone into witness protection after uncovering criminal activity in the music industry. A few even claimed he'd grown tired of the spotlight and wanted peace after years of pressure, heartbreak, and addiction. But there were deeper, stranger details fueling the theory. For example, the death certificate listed his middle name as Aaron, spelled with one A, when Elvis himself always used Aaron. Conspiracy theorists claimed that was a deliberate clue, suggesting the document wasn't real. Then there was the matter of his insurance policy. Some fans argued that no record of a life insurance payout was ever found. Proof, they said, that Elvis didn't actually die. The fact that his father, Vernon, refused to make the policy public only added fuel to the fire. And of course, there was that mysterious temperature inside the casket. Witnesses from the viewing claimed the body looked too perfect, even after days of heat. Morticians later explained that the casket had a built-in cooling system, standard for high-profile viewings, but to believers it only confirmed the theory of a preserved wax dummy. By the 80s, the legend had evolved into a full-blown movement known as Elvis Lives. Authors, filmmakers, and self-proclaimed insiders all came forward with stories claiming to prove that the king had faked his death. Some even gave interviews claiming to have met him under new identities. One of the most famous of these was a man named Dr. Donald Hinton, who in the early 2000s claimed to be Elvis's private physician. Hinton insisted that Elvis was alive and in hiding, communicating through coded letters. He even published a book called The Truth About Elvis Aaron Presley, in his own words. Of course, no real proof ever surfaced, and the story faded, but it kept the flame alive. The fascination with Elvis's casket became part of this obsession. The theory went that if his coffin was ever reopened, the truth would finally be revealed, either confirming his death or exposing the cover-up. Some claimed the coffin had already been opened secretly at least once during the 80s, allegedly by the Presley family to verify the remains. No evidence supports this, but the rumor persists online to this day. In reality, every piece of credible evidence confirms that Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, at age 42. The autopsy, though controversial at first, was conducted by licensed pathologists and verified by the Shelby County Coroner's Office. Toxicology results revealed multiple prescription drugs in his system, contributing to cardiac arrest. The family's decision to keep certain medical details private helped feed the conspiracy, but the science itself was never disproven. Still, Even decades later, fans can't let go. The Elvis sightings continued into the 90s and even the early 2000s, popping up everywhere from gas stations to supermarkets. A man bearing a striking resemblance to the King was even filmed at Graceland in 2016, sparking another wave of speculation online. Why do people believe this stuff? Partly because Elvis never really felt mortal. He wasn't just a singer, he was an idea of rebellion, of glamour, of the American dream. His sudden, unglamorous death didn't fit the myth. For many, it was easier to believe he'd staged his escape than to accept he was gone. Psychologists call this death denial, a common reaction to losing icons we idolize. The same thing happened with Tupac, Michael Jackson, and Jim Morrison. But Elvis was the blueprint, the first megastar whose death became bigger than his life. And so, the casket that once symbolized closure has become something else entirely, a magnet for speculation, mystery, and longing. Every fan who stares at that photograph or visits the meditation garden is really chasing the same question. What if the King never really left the building? Even now, with Graceland open to millions of visitors each year, the casket remains sealed beneath the ground, silent, untouchable, and surrounded by legend. And as long as people keep believing in Elvis, that silence will always feel like it's hiding something. Ongoing rumors of his casket. Decades have passed since Elvis Presley's casket was lowered into the ground at Graceland, but fascination with what lies inside has never truly faded. In fact, in the digital age, it's stronger than ever. Most of them lead nowhere. They are just designed to feed the never-ending appetite for Elvis conspiracies. But the reason these stories still take off is simple. People want to believe there's still something mysterious left to uncover. Graceland, now one of the most visited private homes in America, draws over 500,000 visitors every year. For many, it's not just a museum, it's a pilgrimage. Fans travel from across the world to stand in the meditation garden just a few feet from the marble marker that reads Elvis Aaron Presley. Some kneel to pray, some cry quietly, and some simply stand in silence. But all of them look at that headstone knowing the same thing. They're as close to Elvis as anyone will ever be again. Still, not everyone is convinced that's where he truly rests. Even today, the word opened in connection with Elvis's casket sets off an explosion of speculation. People imagine hidden footage, government documents, even secret DNA tests. The truth, however, is far simpler. There's no public record or credible evidence that Elvis's casket has ever been reopened since his reburial in 1977. The Presley family has never authorized any form of exhumation or examination, and Tennessee law would make such a move nearly impossible without direct family consent. But that hasn't stopped the rumors. In 2002, the so-called Elvis files surfaced online, a collection of supposed leaked documents alleging that the FBI had preserved evidence suggesting Elvis was alive. It turned out to be a fan hoax, but it reignited discussion around the casket and whether it had been tampered with during early Graceland renovations. In 2015, another wave of speculation began after a set of unverified photos appeared, claiming to show workers near a coffin inside Graceland. Experts quickly debunked the images, identifying them as part of an exhibit restoration, not a burial site disturbance. Still, the public's hunger for mystery doesn't rely on proof. It thrives on the idea that something might still be hidden beneath the surface. Part of that comes from how Elvis's death was handled. The early inconsistencies, the sealed autopsy report, the waxy appearance at the funeral, the hurried reburial, all created gaps that fans filled with imagination. Over time, those fragments became folklore, shaping Elvis's afterlife in the public mind. Pop culture has played a huge role too. Films, documentaries, and books have kept his story alive, often blurring fact and fiction for dramatic effect. Every new retelling adds another layer to the myth: the secret tunnels, the lookalikes, the government cover-up theories. Even the 2022 biopic Elvis, while celebrated for its artistry, renewed curiosity about what really happened in those final hours at Graceland. The fascination with his casket isn't just about whether he's inside, it's about what he represents. The sealed coffin has become a symbol of mystery, of mortality, of the line between the man and the myth. For fans who grew up on his music, it's the last physical link to a world that once felt bigger, brighter, and simpler. Some psychologists say the obsession speaks to something deeper, a need to believe our icons never truly leave us. The same way ancient cultures built shrines to their heroes, modern fans build online archives, tribute pages, and endless theories. The internet has simply turned those candlelight vigils into digital ones. Walk through Graceland today and you'll still see it. People standing by the garden at dusk, eyes fixed on the marble plaque, cameras off, whispering to themselves. It's not about proving anything. It's about feeling close to something that once defined a generation. Legacy of Elvis Presley. More than 40 years after his death, Elvis Presley remains one of the most recognizable figures on Earth. His music still sells, his home still draws crowds, and his name still stirs the same awe it did in the 1950s. Yet somewhere between fact and legend, between the man and the myth, lies the reason his story never truly ends. Elvis's casket, the same one viewed by tens of thousands in 1977, has come to symbolize that blurred line. For some, it's a reminder of how much the world loved him. For others, it's a door that is never fully closed. The moment it was sealed, Elvis stopped being just a man and became something else entirely, a piece of American folklore. What's fascinating is how his death didn't erase his presence. If anything, it expanded it. The world has seen countless stars rise and fall, but few have remained as alive in memory as Elvis Presley. His image, his voice, his swagger, they're everywhere. On t-shirts, in commercials, in movies, even in holograms on stage. And it's not just nostalgia keeping him alive. Elvis's influence runs deep through modern music. In the stagecraft of Bruno Mars, the charisma of Harry Styles, the swagger of country and rock performers who still borrow from the blueprint he created. He changed what it meant to be a star, not just a singer, but a symbol. Maybe that's why the mystery surrounding his casket still captures people's attention. It isn't really about whether it's been opened or not, it's about what Elvis means to us. Every rumor, every theory, every headline beginning with Elvis Presley's casket has been opened is just another way the world keeps reaching for him, refusing to let go. Because deep down, people don't want closure. They don't want the story to be over. The idea of Elvis still out there somewhere, living quietly beyond the fame, feels comforting, especially in a world that's lost so many legends too soon. Graceland today stands as both a home and a memorial. It's a place frozen in time. The gold records on the walls, the jumpsuits behind glass, the piano where he played his last songs. And then there's the meditation garden, where the flowers never stop arriving. That garden isn't just a resting place. It's a conversation between the living and the memory of Elvis Presley. Every August, during the candlelight vigil, thousands of fans gather with candles in hand, walking silently toward the garden. The flames flicker against the night air as songs like "Can't Help Falling in Love" drift softly from speakers. It's not a funeral anymore, it's a celebration. People aren't mourning Elvis. They're keeping him alive in the only way they can, by remembering. In that sense, the sealed casket doesn't hold an ending. It holds a promise that as long as people keep playing his music, visiting his home, or whispering Elvis's lives, the king will never be gone. Because maybe that's the real secret inside that casket, not a body or a cover-up, but the one thing death could never bury, a legend that refuses to fade.